maybe there was a lot of people there, about 14, because we do Crit Club, so in the studios a few of us kind of get together and go on and criticise. My name is Karen Davies and I'm University and CPD programme here, and it's been an absolute pleasure actually having Caroline in residence since
mid-March.
Yeah, mid-March, and she's here for a couple of more weeks, and this is her studio that we're in at the moment. And it was just, she's doing a talk for the public in a couple of weeks, but when the opportunity came up to have Barbara here as well, it was just great to get some regional artists in and maybe get a bit of dialogue going about the work and see what you guys think, and the opportunity to really kind of have a bit of discussion about the work which both Caroline and Barbara are kind of encouraging this evening. So it's obviously a pleasure to have Barbara here as well. So, and you'll have gathered from having a look at the text that Barbara is a kind of collaborator or participant or co-conspirator, all the words we kind of throw around earlier on in the work when we kind of, when I was asking Barbara how she wanted to be introduced. But I think really there are a lot of kind of things that you'll have picked up within the work that maybe we can kind of discuss and ask questions about. But thank you very much for coming along, and thank you for taking part and agreeing to meet with the regional artists. But it should be a good evening.
It is going to be good. It's going to be good.
Take it away.
Oh, thank you. Thanks. Well, Barbara and I really wanted to share this piece. It really documents a really traumatic situation that Barbara went through, and I was alongside with her daughter Yasha, some sort of 3 or 4 very traumatic months in 2009. And we realised throughout that time that we kept all our texts, and even a year after the event and then everything had settled back down again, we realised neither of us could bear to delete the texts that were on our phones. Texting is such a throwaway medium, yet we'd really shared some very profound and deep felt things with each other through that situation that really documented the sort of culmination of a really sort of dramatic event in Barbara's life. So I'm very interested in my own practice with working with language, and become more and more interested with the way we interact through text and email and internet. So it seemed like a good kind of content to put together into a text piece, and in a way it's kind of broadened my practice in that I've worked with words before, but very simple words and in a kind of disability context. But this was a whole story, a whole narrative. So it's been an interesting step for my practice to move from just words and concepts of language into a story, a narrative. And so as part of my residency, I've been investigating how to present this. It's been through various forms. It started, possibly it was going to be a flash movie or an animation. But then when I actually just transcripted it all from the phone and put it up on the wall, for me it was such a powerful time that actually the physical impact of a big block of text seems to me at the moment the most interesting current carnation of it. So we'll see. Sort of at the moment it's just on photocopy paper. This is not a final piece at all. It's the content and possibly the format in terms of size, but otherwise it will go through a few more transformations before it's a finished gallery piece. So I think I'm going to just ask Barbara to talk a little bit now about her role and her impressions of that time, and then we'll start talking to each other about content a bit more.
Okay. Well, my impressions, if you've read enough of the text, you'll know that my impressions were completely morphine-fueled. So essentially, for about 3/4 of the time that those texts were being written, I was off my head. And which, but in the lucid moments, so I think sometimes, it must be what it's like to have dementia or something. It's like these little flashes of lucidity. And during that time, I probably wrote, some of the sort of longer, clearer texts. But for me, I was trapped in this nightmare, and the only way that I could make sense of it, because I was in this institution of the hospital and nobody in the hospital was helping me make sense of anything. So the only way that I could try and get some sense out of the whole situation and try and kind of clarify my thinking was to text my friends. And so I was texting a lot of people, but we discovered at the end of it that 3 of us kept the texts even a year later. And it was, reading through those texts again was been really quite extraordinary to recall some of the detail of that. And even some of the detail that I think I'd probably tried to put to the back of my mind. And here it is, come back to haunt me. But having discussed it and having thought about it, we actually thought that it's, in a lot of ways, this is the kind of information, and it's more than information, but this is the kind of content that needs to get out there into the public domain, because actually a lot of the time the way in which people get treated in these situations, so it's only one of the things that amongst disabled people that gets talked about a lot is how disempowering it can be when you get put into certain situations, and so that the person that you are, once you become ill or you get put into hospital, is that just recedes and you just become this patient that has particular symptoms and is a particular problem to be solved or to be fixed, and nothing more than that. And that, for somebody, is a hugely problematic experience, and I think that comes across in some of the texts as well. So one of the things that we thought was, maybe if you've had enough time to browse through them, if there are any that you picked up on in particular that you might want to ask us about or whatever. I mean, I thought the other thing, just before I stop, is that in the middle of it all, there was just this real sort of dark, macabre humour going on, and that when I read it again, I did laugh, because I sort of described myself as that I was waiting and waiting and waiting for this surgery. And at the beginning, when I first got sick, I had no idea that it would culminate in having my leg chopped off. And so it was, I was just, you can actually almost feel it goes across, and you can almost see the process, of kind of my changing thoughts about it. And eventually, when I'd kind of come to grips with the notion that I would lose a limb, I described myself as a two-legged beastie, and then I started signing myself the monoped. So that's my sign-off now, the monoped.
Yeah, I think that also what was interesting about text is you don't ramble on in the text. You don't start with "Dear Barbara," "Dear Caroline." It's not like an email situation. There's very occasionally there are greetings, or we're saying hello as we get writing to each other. But mostly we're just jumping straight in and saying what's necessary, because that's the nature of the medium. So that in itself is interesting, because it's brought out quite a concise honesty from both of us. As well as the humour. So, but we're really interested in your impressions of it, because it is a piece in development. It's really valuable for us to just hear opinions, impressions, thoughts that it gives you. So, so I guess what we'd really like to do now is to ask you to maybe, if there's anything that particularly struck you, or I think with lots and lots of these dramas, they're actually quite profound dramas, but each text is the tip of quite big icebergs in so many different ways. And so I'm really interested to see sort of what other people think reading it, coming to it for the first time. You feel you might particularly like to ask, or like to say that you've noticed about some of this.
I'd like to ask, first of all, whether you knew each other beforehand, and how the association came about, how the collaboration happened. Were you at school together or something? Or?
No.
So, can you tell us about that?
Yeah, we met through work. I was doing a course. I went on a course which was designed, it's called Innovate, designed for disabled artists, to help artists write funding applications. And it was run by Barbara and her colleague, Zoe Partington-Solinger, and it was a residential course. So we got drunk a lot.
Yeah. Everybody who's ever been on a residential will know what happens in the evenings, and that you kind of spend 4 days sleep deprived, but getting some really good creative buzzes out of it as well. So, yeah, so that's where it all began.
Yeah, yeah.
About 6 years ago, I guess now, isn't it? So.
Gosh, I think more than
More?
that. Probably like eight
I
or
have
9.
no idea of time. I mean, I feel like I lost quite a lot of,
Maybe, I mean,
and now it's meaningless.
Yeah, I mean, I met you when...
That knows you to jump in with the kind of the depth of text that you see there, rather than sort of having to go through formalities. If you've known each other for 4 years before this happened, I can understand the nuance of what's going on.
And the way I came to be within this situation is Barbara lives in London, I live in Buckinghamshire, and I do have various meetings, I'm on various boards and things, and I end up going to London quite a lot, and Barbara has a lovely house, and even when I first met her, she said, oh, come to London, come and stay, and sometimes you say that to people, you never think it's quite going to happen, but Barbara and I did get into that rhythm of I will go and stay, and we just got on very well on all sorts of personal levels, as well as from a kind of, disability and political point of view. So it really began for me. I remember quite clearly we were actually thinking about doing a project together. We were sitting and doing a little bit of brainstorming about it, and Barbara said, I've got a really sore toe. Can we just go to the doctor's this afternoon, because it's really sore? And she showed me this little mark on her toe, and it's really, really where it all began. Yeah. Doctor just gave you some cream, didn't she?
Yeah.
Little did we know it was the start of this.
Gangrene.
Yeah.
It was the start of my gangrene.
Yeah.
Yes.
Do you ever say that in this word?
Actually,
I mean,
no,
I sort of
we
see
don't.
some things that I know a little bit about, but in terms of I think it's quite interesting that in terms of to follow the medical story isn't obvious in this.
No.
So
No.
I mean, like, you're saying more.
Yes.
I'm knowing more
Yes.
than I would have with this. So there's something about that the gist, or not quite telling the story. I'm profound, isn't you? I'm looking for the actual
moment.
operation.
Yeah.
So there's something about.
That's actually really
sense,
interesting.
sense.
Yeah.
You kind of go, so what did happen, or what? So it's told in this particular way, and it's not told in here. Actually, on the wall. It's not told on the wall.
That's an interesting contrast, actually, because something that just kind of politically as disabled people we're quite sensitised to is how much you share about your particular impairment, and it's that kind of question, particularly when your impairment is visible, people will do the whole what's wrong with you thing. And from a kind of, I don't know, politically aware perspective, I guess, you say, well, it's not about my medical condition, it's about what I'm experiencing, or it's about the barriers or whatever. So in some ways, yeah, you're absolutely right, and we don't actually talk in very graphic detail about what was happening to Barbara. It's more the kind of emotional territory of, I think you can certainly tell from the texts about, legless by tonight, that at some point she loses a limb, but there's not, and then in I think the first or second text it says something like, I've been diagnosed with vascular disease, I didn't know I had. So you've just got the barest bones of the medical thing. And actually, that's kind of interesting like that.
There's a real life context as well. There are other things going on around you. You're reporting things on television, things in the outside world, which there's this agony going on, set in a perfectly normal context or historical context.
Yeah. Well, it was one of my sort of, ways of keeping in touch with reality is, every day I listen to the news and I read a newspaper and, and I need to keep in touch with what is going on. And so despite everything, and through the sort of, morphine haze a lot of the time, I was still noticing what was going on out there, like that thing about, Peter Mandelson's not going to privatise the post office, but he's still a bastard, and it was like, because, it helped me to feel as if there was some kind of reality that I could still be anchored to. Yeah.
I came across the people you were bedfellows with around the side. That was really funny. Very funny.
Well, that's that whole situation. I write, and I write comedy, and I have performed comedy, And that is your classical sitcom territory, which is being trapped. It's, you know, sort of Rodney and Del Boy and Steptoe and Son and all of those classic comedies where, you know, people are trapped with each other and there is not an escape route. And so what comes out of that is comedy. And I suppose I just couldn't help it. I just kept finding comedy in these ghastly situations. Yeah. So, and I mean, the thing that happens is you don't choose who is in the bed next to you. You don't choose who's opposite you. And, you know, excuse me if any of you are Daily Mail readers, but if you are, you're not going to fucking like what you hear next. But, you know, it's just, I was just trapped with these people that spouted this racist crap. And, you know, and it got every single hackle rising. And I just thought, it's a really difficult situation because I can't actually escape from here. I can't storm out, damn. So I'm going to have to think about how I address this. And so I did, I challenged them, but I challenged them quite intellectually. And I'd say, what evidence do you have for this? You know, and I did. I deliberately actually ended up belittling them because I just thought, you know, they're saying this stuff with no foundation because they're just saying it because they are racist and because they buy what they read in these horrible papers. And so, you know, I thought, and I actually said to several of the women, you know, if you think it, keep it to yourself. I'm not interested. And so I was actually fairly confrontational. But, you know, the flip side of that was quite funny, and I think it comes out in a couple of the texts, is that when you strip that away, all that sort of reactionary politics that those women had, they were quite kind individuals. You know, if you were in pain and you were sort of screaming in the night and all that kind of stuff, they'd come up to you and say, are you all right, dear? And, you know, is there anything I can do for you? Do you want wine gum? Wine gums were the you know...
Currency,
yeah. They fixed everything, wine gums.
I just want to say, I really like the fact that it's been immortalised. Text messaging is seen, like you said earlier, it's such a throwaway thing. People see it as such a throwaway old text messaging, emails, almost like they don't mean anything, they're worthless. But actually they're not. I had an experience a couple of years ago with a friend who was diagnosed with a very serious illness, didn't have a very good prognosis, and a lot of communication, we were talking about this the other night, a lot of communication was via text, and she had control of that situation where 10 years ago people would have to rely on their partners to pass on messages, and they would have access, immediate contact with their friends and what they wanted to say and how they wanted to say it. So I love that it's here and we can see it because it's given it value.
Yeah.
And recently on telly there was I watched it last night. There was some relate sessions, relate counselling, animated. So they used the actual voices of the people who were going through the counselling session, but they animated it as a way to, and it just was brilliant because there was so much meaning to it and value to it because it's the real, and that this is the same for me because it's there and it's not flippant, it's not thrown away. It means something. And
I completely agree with you. I just think one of the few areas that I felt I had some power was in expressing how I felt. Because you really do get stripped of so much power and actually, so much dignity. Because, you may notice that few of the texts are about shitting. And, it is one of the things that happens to you when you get given morphine is that you basically become your bowels cease to function properly. And after a week, that is a problem. So anybody here been constipated? You know what I'm talking about. And so, it doesn't just become discomfort, it just becomes yet another horrible, horrible element of the agony that you are experiencing. And what Caroline kept saying to me, and one of my best friends is a GP, and she kept saying to me, have they not given you any of this stuff or that stuff? And I was saying, no. And none of that was being managed. So I was just being pumped full of drugs that were only working to a certain extent. And there was no other medical management of the condition. And actually, you know, the other thing that struck me all over again, reading them, was that the level of incompetence, the level of mismanagement, the level of sheer stupidity, actually, that accompanied this experience. And I was saying that one of the things I'd love to do with this is take it to the team of medics and surgeons and doctors that looked after me at that time at University College Hospital in London, which is a brand new hospital. It's all supposed to be state of the art, you know, it's all supposed to be their best. And it was shocking. It was so poor, the treatment from beginning to end. And actually, even when I got discharged, it wasn't the end of the story, because they discharged me with a horrible infection in the wound, which took months and months and months to clear up, and I had to go somewhere else to get that cleared up. I had to go to a different hospital and you know, have intravenous antibiotics for about 4, you know, it was just sort of, it felt like it was going on. And it just, you know, yeah, it just really is. It's they're all different elements of the story, and in a sense, that's why I agree with Caroline. Is that in a sense that's why, in a way, some of the medical detail doesn't matter, because what mattered sort of comes out there.
This is very real in a way. If you'd written a diary about it, lots of prose, lots of, it wouldn't have the same impact as this has, because it's immediate.
Yeah.
What was happening there and then.
Yeah.
Is this the whole process? Does this include the aftercare?
Some of it.
Some of it, yeah.
So this is this brings me to the artwork, because I have to admit, when I was reading it down rather than across, and I'm sure people coming to the work as a text piece, a wall text piece like this, will either, you know, pick little bits out, so they won't get the complete narrative unless it's kind of done in chronological order. So does that worry you? Or,
I think that's something that I'm hoping to address in a future edition, because something, again, that's not really working at the moment is that we've got, I mean, I've very specifically copied everything, our names, the date, the time, even down to the second, that as it was recorded on the text. And at the moment, it's still quite lost in the block of text. So as well as actually visually just maybe doing something to separate this out a bit, this information out, between me and Barbara Caroline, doing something just slightly visually to just make it a little bit clearer to the viewer that it's going on in a sort of, you're reading it like you read across a page. I think that probably does need to happen, because you're not the only person who said that to me, and it's something that, again, you know, it does need to be clear. I just wanted to go back to the point that you made about not having the medical information. Did you feel that? No, I just wondered if you.
I was trying to draw you on what you were just saying.
Okay.
And to feedback as just someone encountering it as a text piece on a wall. You know, it's not text, it's not spoken, it's not on a page, it's on a wall. So I noticed straight away I saw something like that, and I think a lot of things. I think about how, one of the ways I started to really like text myself was because they are like haikus sometimes, you know, sort of poems to each other. So, but I've started looking at it in fragments randomly, and then I thought, maybe I'll try and figure out, I couldn't tell who was Barbara or who, you know, just what I mean, I didn't know. And I was thinking, who's the artist who's on residency here, which one is which, and is that to her or from her? So it was like there was no, you know, so it was very broken and fragmented, and I was fine with that. And then I started to read it down when I started to think, okay, let's follow the conversation. So I can't see it visually that way. Something about the shape of it.
Even though the time's on it, I hadn't really tracked I thought time was moving down this way rather than
it wasn't until I sat down I started to follow the days. And then I wondered why it's summer empty. I can't find that logic. But my question about I was sort of I was kind of pleased to observe there's someone's in hospital, something really medical going on, it's something really, really heavy. It's quite visceral information, but it's resisting telling me. And then I was slightly distracted by the fact that you started to tell me, because you're here, in fact, it's a completely different context. And so I was thinking about that thing of especially as someone disabled, to be medicalised all over again with illness and all that, and so that this is more this social story of between between you two and the emotion. So I completely observed the thing that you said.
Oh, that's
but as text, I have this other sort of. So now I'm kind of looking at it, wondering why sometimes our texts are quite long, quite chatty, and then sometimes they're brief, and you don't even say dear or hi.
Yeah.
Like you say. So there's something about how it's existing in space as coming at me now that I've got your questions about it now, because I'm sort of drawn to the really short ones, and I don't know how to deal with the really long ones, and then I get into a really long one, I'm really engaged, and I jumped around, and then I started to look for the key narrative moment, the big operation, and then I gave up, and then and it's something about the size of it. I'm not sure why it's the size it is. There's a lot I like about it. I sort of enjoy spending time with it, but there's lots of questions about its shape, which is what you're at the moment, I think.
I think that's the way people in a gallery would come to it, isn't it? They would take little bits from it. It's not going to be something they start and work their way right through to the end, I think. They will grab bits from it, and if they want the narrative, they'll spend time on it and follow it through more closely. But is that destroy your intention?
Not necessarily, but can I just ask, did anybody read it across, or did you all kind of take bits and fragments or read it in different ways?
It took me a minute, but I figured out.
It was going across.
Yeah.
You get the prize! Yay!
And immediately started reading it down. And
Okay.
then started kind of figuring bits.
Yeah.
And also because it's not all, I also then had this thing about, despite enjoying and appreciating its kind of fragmentariness, and that you weren't necessarily trying to obviously give a, otherwise it would be a book and follow like that, but it isn't always dialogue, so you're looking for dialogue.
But we figured that some of the texts were missing, and so, sometimes that's represented by a blank where there's a gap. I mean, there's a gap.
No, the gap. The reason for the gaps is some of them are quite specifically little conversations. So, very unfortunately, the Operation Poo, sort of halfway up the wall, right on the far right there, the text is, Caroline has Operation Poo finished. And that there's a blank before it, because that was the start of an exchange. And then Barbara's no, still straining, I'm in hell. And then I thought they'd taken you down. I didn't hear from her for so long. I thought she'd actually gone for surgery, but she was straining in the loo the whole time. So that little fragment was just those three texts. And I'd put it up earlier in a different shape with no gaps at all. And this was just to experiment, are the gaps going to give, just a little stop in the pace of it, but also sort of make it a little bit clearer that these are texts exchanged over a long period of time, and it wasn't one conversation backwards and forwards. I mean, there's another gap along here. I'm just going to point it out. Let's see. Okay, here. So we've got the 27th of May, 2009, and then there's a gap, end of conversation, and then the 6th of June. And that was 9 days of actually a really dramatic period in this series of events in which Barbara was sent home from hospital and twice tried to go back in, knowing that she was going to have an amputation, but was turned away, and Yasha and I were basically trying to nurse her at home, sort of almost scared that we were going to kill her, because we had all sorts of different morphine to give her. She was needing morphine every few hours. She could hardly move around. She was not lucid. The morphine was absolutely, making her hallucinate and things. And we were just basically left on our own to cope. And the hospital kept saying, come back, and then turning us away again. And I guess to my mind at the moment, the gap isn't an adequate representation of the deep, dark hole that the story went into at that point. So maybe it's at the moment with limited success, breaks the piece up. It was just to see this with this particular version of it, whether or not the gaps worked.
And we've got a question here as well. So sorry, we'll bring you in, but okay. No, you're not. Seriously, go ahead.
Are these the sample of the text that took place? You made a decision in terms of which text you were going to put on the wall first? These are the ones that survived?
Pretty much. There's the odd one that I've taken out that's maybe referred to other events in my life, family events that were kind of just too sensitive to mention. But it's pretty much all of it at the moment.
So you didn't feel you needed to make a selection of text to get a message across, because you felt you could include most of them apart from the really personalised?
Well, I think in this instance, Barbara and I, we're too close to it. And it would be interesting to hear whether or not you felt that there were bits that were just superfluous to the story.
Well, for myself, I love the extraneous external detail. It contextualises what's obviously been a very traumatic period, and I think someone else mentioned, just love reading what's going on in the world. It's quite amazing these things do filter through at such a traumatic time, and that for me contextualises the experience. So for me, I like that enrichment. So I was kind of interested if there's anything that you felt this review, you thought, well, that's not relevant to the story, I'm going to leave that text out. But
Yeah.
So it's nearly all there apart from some of the really personal.
Yeah, I mean, the sort of, kind of necessary editing, I think, is kind of, we haven't really gone into that territory too much, have we? I tend to like it as it is. What do you think?
I think that in a way, but I mean, I'm very close to this, so I think that it works, but it works for me because of my very specific sort of relationship with it. But I'm a writer, and so, I mean, the thing that's going on in my head was thinking maybe this can turn into a play for voices, that's, that might work quite well, to sort of have that dialogue going on.
The thing is, by having everything there, where it jumps or where you feel there might be something missing, you just have this imagination of what might be happening, or the kind of, there might be conversations that you've had on the phone, or you might have been out of hospital and back in, but there's the kind of more of a sense of just the hugeness or the horror that might be going on in between one text to another. Having been able to read or have the time to read all of it, you get a sense of, oh God, well, I wonder what happened just before that.
I think that's a good point. Yeah. I think that, in a way, I mean, that's the nature of all art, isn't it? Is you want people to use their imagination with it. Is that, you don't spoon-feed people with it. You say that, take what you can from this, work with it, and that is, I think that's the intent, largely. Yeah. And the minute you start editing it, that you interfere with that process.
Because texting, I mean, it's a very two-way conversation, isn't it? It's very private, though you can share it, but of course you have shared it here.
Yeah.
Well, 2 years down the line, is that still how you communicate, or are you tweeting and Facebooking and taking it super injunction-wise in another direction? Or is this still how you talk to each other?
It is.
Yeah.
Very much. Yeah.
Because with tweeting, you would have a conversation with more than one person, wouldn't you? But this is still two-way.
Yeah, very, and it's also very personal, and I guess in a lot of ways, in some of the instances, very knowing. As two disabled people, we are very aware. Like when Barbara sends me the text about I sacked my old OT, she's a patronising old cow, and goes on about, she's using this language and I'm telling her it's not okay. She's doing that very much in shorthand because she knows I would understand that whole thing about disabling negative language and the woman not listening and trying to get that message across. So in some ways that's a profound thing. There's kind of there's other sort of elements there, but very much taken as a given. As soon as she wrote that I'd understand exactly how frustrating that was, and so there's that very personal kind of, what does she do? What did she? Can I get a hair wash? Can I all that kind of thing?
Did you ever get frustrated if you had to wait a long time for a reply?
Well, yeah. So, but it wasn't. I mean, I did, but partly it's because this was one of my threads of sanity. Yeah. I mean, but there were other people I was texting as well. You see, so at the moment, what we've got is this strand of texting. But there were, I would say I was texting with my daughter, with 2 or 3 other very good friends who were also visiting me. But that was, so there were several conversations going on, and this is one of the ones that survived. There is another one that we found out about recently, and it's strange because all independently, a few people actually kept the text from that era, which is... No, go ahead.
Is it due to the capacity of the phone, or is it an active decision to keep the text? Because a few years ago, phones wouldn't keep as many texts as they do now. And it was, you know, I remember myself, do I keep this text or not? Is this an important one to keep, and it being such a transient thing? And I wonder if it was an active decision on the people involved to keep them.
Yeah, all these came off my phone, and it completely was. And I ended up just deleting loads more texts from that were not texts I would want to keep, you know, like updates from Orange and, you know, sort of stuff from my mum. When, you know, I talked to my mum so frequently that we, you know, it was more just like, how are you, that kind of thing. But these, I just couldn't bear to get rid of them. And I started writing them down and really just never wanted to delete any of them. So I think occasionally I might have deleted bits from me, but I didn't delete any that I got from Barbara.
And that's the hardest thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
Which ones
Yeah, very much. Yes.
The ones between you and Yasha, your daughter, must have been very different. Imagines in tone, could be quite different at times.
Yes.
Could be a lot more honest with friends, perhaps, than Yasha. Has she seen this, and does she have any sort of...
She hasn't seen this. And I was trying to protect her. Definitely. Because I say, it says in the text, actually, at certain points, doesn't it? Don't tell Yasha.
Yeah.
So that was something, I mean, in the end, you know, there was it's a bit difficult not to tell somebody when you're having a part of your body, an external part of your body removed, you know, it's a bit of a giveaway. So, I mean, but she was in the middle of A-levels. I mean, it was really awful because I was feeling, you know, all the guilt that parents get anyway. And I was feeling like crap because I thought I should be here supporting her. And instead, I'm in this situation. I mean, it wasn't, there was nothing I could do about it. It had happened, but it didn't make it easy. Yeah. So it is very, you are right. There was a different type of conversation because I kept saying to her, no, it's fine, it's fine. I mean, she could see for herself eventually, you know, at a certain point past which there was no return, it became clear it wasn't fine. And she was one of the ones feeding me morphine, you know, so
Yeah, I mean, I ended up just coming to stay at Barbara's house to be with Yasha and be with Barbara, and it just kind of happened that as the situation unfolded, I couldn't go home. I just couldn't leave you. I couldn't leave Yasha. But Yasha was incredibly strong. She was amazing. She's the most sorted, grounded, sensible, wonderful 18-year-old girl at this point in time, who managed to get 3 A's in her A-levels.
Yeah, after all that. And philosophy, I wouldn't mind. I know, in fact, she was...
Have you thought about how it's going to look, what kind of materials? Like use glass for it to replicate a screen, or...
Yeah.
I was wondering about colours.
Well, you've kept the text as it appears, haven't you? It's that particular kind of text which everybody immediately will associate with.
It's a downloaded font. It's not actually taken from the phone. It's written. I've just typed it up and found an old Nokia phone font. Very particularly to reference the phone. So certainly I think the font is working. And in terms of the material, I mean, glass is something I considered actually. Also maybe something I've been having crits with the curators here. Potentially something very fragile. It's very powerful content. So maybe you're sort of bringing something in that's very, very sort of ephemeral, just to give that contrast. And actually, this is my line of inquiry over the next week, is just finding the right substance to put it on. And so there'll be lots of experiments with different kinds of things, you know, fragile things, robust things, unusual things that maybe just very subtly reference. For instance, I thought maybe sort of getting it screen printed onto hospital sheets or something. Something that's just, in some ways I really like the simplicity. So I want to keep the simplicity to some degree, but maybe also bring in a reference surrounding the work, or to sort of just pull out a different part of it.
You would consider pulling the two conversations apart to make a conversation between two walls or two screens?
Well, I thought about that, particularly when I was investigating doing this as a flash movie. You know, do I have two phones on one screen with messages coming up, or do I have, originally I'd envisioned it with kind of two different digital projectors, and you'd have a phone here and a phone there. And when I looked at, there's 110 texts here, I thought how many times the viewer's going to have to do that, look from one to the other, sort of how feasible it is. And then you've got to consider things like the pace at which people read. And even if you've got it as text and not as a film, there's still that thing about the viewers taking their eyes to one place and then to another and to another and to another. And you've got quite a long convoluted thread with conversations broken up in there. So this was something, that, I sort of kind of actively considered. I mean, it feels very simple to just see it up like this, but the number of different versions I've tried of it has been quite extensive over the past few weeks. And eventually I just got to have it all up on the wall. And then kind of thought, wow, actually there's something really powerful about just having it all together. Because as an experience, it was very strong, and having it as a piece filling your field of vision, just like a Rothko painting or something, where it's absolutely in front of you, it retained that power that I felt was appropriate to the situation.
Well, a couple of things. Bearing in mind like the emissions, then how important is the linearity? And then also, what are your expectations of the person who encounters it? Right. And how do they encounter
it? Okay. With the linear part of your question first, I quite like, again, that that not everything is there, and the viewer's got to think about who's speaking and what's happening and things. I also actually imagined to sort of, or a potential line of inquiry that I'm still following is that would enhance the content and the way the story goes along, is to add an audio part to it, so that you've got maybe fragments of our recollections playing as you're looking at the piece. So in some ways it would kind of enhance that understanding that it's a story that goes along and along and along, as well as possibly breaking up visually in different ways how it's displayed. So I guess those expectations are still evolving. With regard to how somebody would come to the piece, and sorry, could you just repeat that last bit of the question again?
What are your expectations of the person who encounters it, and how?
It's difficult to say, because I guess to some extent as an audience you can't really fully predict how your audience is going to react. You can authentically deliver something that you feel kind of, works on different levels from your perspective. I think I would like to think the audience would be aware of the different types of stories going on here. The person being in hospital, the whole, sort of shift of power, the feeling of helplessness, some of the issues surrounding language and things, and you've got that kind of disability element in there. Just the, I guess the experience of being in hospital. So there's kind of different layers at play that I would like the audience to respond to. I would hope that there is enough in there for the audience to pick out those different layers.
I guess there's somewhere between the passive watcher and the active witness.
Well, I mean, I guess really it's more passive watcher, because it's all happened, and it's a very much a thing that, it's history, I guess. It's a story.
Yeah. I mean, it is. It captures, events at that particular time. But also for me, I hope that one of the things that comes out of it is that, that somebody gets a sense of survival, you know, that sort of, that what comes out of it is actually that there's this real sort of intent to survive going on there, and humour, which is the other thing, because, you know, humour is what I do, and I just want really, you know, even if in the sort of darkest moments we were having these really kind of humorous, ironic exchanges, you know, based on, actually, as Kat says, based on that sort of common knowledge that you know that you and other disabled people have. So that, you know, there was one thing that there was one little sentence in there that is about that, but it's something that a lot of disabled people understand, which is when I got patted on the head. And I'd just been kind of wheeled down to physiotherapy or something, and I was left sitting in a corridor, which also happens a lot. You should get left sitting around, and somebody walked past and patted me on the head. And it was my physio, actually. She said, "Oh, you just look so miserable. I just wanted to..." Yeah. And it was like almost this instinct. It just came out of me, and I said, "Don't ever fucking do that again." Not to anyone, ever. You know, I was just like, this immediate rage came out of me, and I just thought, well, you know, it's quite good that I'm still feeling this angry about what's going on, because, you know, when you've got that going on, you're still there.
Yeah. So I guess different audiences are going to take different things from it also in that context.
I think the idea of this, I don't know, I've been thinking of a different feeling about it, but it's the idea of witness. Sometimes I think to stand in front of text-based works that are objects or wall-based pieces, I quite often have this sense of bearing witness. Or, recently I saw the Mary Kelly work that was in Manchester.
Oh yeah.
And they're these objects, but they're these long pieces of text, and this sort of phenomenon of the art gallery that was not very busy, but, you know, kind of quite a good flow going through, sort of middle of the weekend sort of thing. But that it was a big exhibition, and it's text that has been made into quite weighty object, you know, written onto metal, you know, but people would stand in front of them, you know. We did. There's two of us there. We were there. We happened to just get into it and be there for ages. And you could glance, but people would stand for ages in front of one piece and read it. And there was this, quite a very complicated relationship to reading of a beautiful object and looking for the stories and looking for the testimony, because they are testaments, and testimonies, and across many years, across several decades of work. So I was thinking about that kind of what happens to the audience's bodies in the space in relation to this body of text. And I don't have an answer for you, but I was starting to think about that you spend time with these stories, and that surely in terms of...
This is kind of a bit of a... But this is a discussion that happens in galleries, isn't it? Because, I mean, you know, I was hearing something on the radio, an arts programme where the organisers of the Da Vinci exhibition coming up at the National Gallery are saying, you know, they've actually reduced the hourly throughput of people at that exhibition. But what they're saying is, well, actually, what we're going to try and do, because people stop and read the text that goes alongside the image, and saying that what we're trying to do is encourage people to find out in advance, you know, give them the booklet, you know, all the stuff that you get at the Tate and all that. So, you know, give them the information in advance, try and get them to do a bit of homework, basically. So, I mean, you can't do that with something like this, but what you could do is give people a copy of the text so that they can actually follow it in some way, separately as well, you know, so they can see the piece, but then they can read it in another format.
The text is the word, and that is different. I mean, that I have a slight problem with. It's like instead taking away the act of looking, you have to read about it before you look at it.
It's true. It's true. No, I agree.
There's also this question of the ephemeral, everyday mobile phone text turned into kind of object that you can only see if you go and see it. So there is
Yeah.
something about the body of the viewer
As opposed
right
to
in front of you.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, the ephemerality and now it's sort of permanence as our object, potentially, but also you have to be there to read it
Yeah.
in the gallery. Or there's many other ways that it can
Yeah.
manifest online for
Yeah.
accessibility, obviously, you know, for people who can't come to the gallery.
In terms of scale, how will this compare to the final thing? Because if we were all to try and read this together at the moment, we'd scarcely be able to read it, would we?
Yeah. Well, I'd love to think big crowds of people are all going to try and read it at once. I have to say that's still evolving. That's certainly something to take into account. You know, at the moment I'm in here with a printer. It's A4. It's a given. It's not, you know, necessarily you know, it might be nice to be much bigger. I do have to take into account storage, you know, where I'm going to be able to show it and things. I'd imagine it won't get too much bigger, but, you know, there needs to be a sort of, it needs to be the right size for a lot of people to read, and I think in some ways it's still a little bit too small for my liking, just in terms of the printout, and the reason that I selected that point size on the computer is simply because we've got these longer texts that fill the paper, you know, which is not a reason for it to stay that size at all. It's just simply, you know, needs must as I'm working through it. I mean, even with that size, this is how it's filling all, but this is again, you know, just a very simple given format, just to you know, take stock of the content. So that's still in progress.
You mentioned that you tried some other configurations before you came to this. What other ones did you try out? I had one that was sort of ran the whole of this wall, so it was longer and thinner. I quite liked that actually. I quite liked, because people really did have to walk backwards and forwards, and that was actually interesting in itself. The kind of pacing, the energy of it.
Why did they have to walk backwards and forwards?
Because they were reading it in a linear way. So
if it's just in a frieze, you would kind of follow. You walk and follow the story as you went round, surely.
It goes from the top line and then it started again on the second line and so on, like you're reading a page on a book.
Oh, so it wasn't as a frieze. It was.
Sorry, I didn't say freeze. It just okay. It just went along this wall, just much more along this wall. So I think you can just about stand there, depending on your eyesight, and read it without moving around too much. And again, this is the studio I'm working in, so this is kind of, you know, the size of the wall. So.
Have you thought about really shrinking it? Because I'm thinking texts in this instance is quite intimate, and maybe there's something about massive then you lose that intimacy.
Yeah. In fact, I have printed it out, sort of small, like a book, really. And again, I didn't like that in the same way I didn't like the animations. It just, you don't see all of it at the same time, and I suppose I'm at the stage where I just want to. It's got to have that strong feeling, that largeness. It doesn't have it when you're turning the pages. It just doesn't. It didn't work for me, I guess. You know, you could maybe read it as a story in some ways, but even if I was to make an artist's book, for example, I would not put more than one text on one page. So, like, I've printed a document where it's, you know, one text on one page, and then sort of just literally put it, you know, down to a small point size, and put them one after the other like paragraphs in a book. And neither of those formats were particularly satisfying. I played it as a PowerPoint for the same reason. You know, you can have it projected quite small or projected quite large. Even, you know, the idea of having it projected quite large but one page at a time just somehow wasn't enough. It's, yeah, so that's... So this is, I think it's more about modifying a large format than changing it too much. Certainly from where I'm coming from.
Yeah, the intimacy thing is a really good point, because you kind of, as you're reading it well today, I had my first pat on the head in a wheelchair. And, you know, I was in paraphrasing it and laughed out loud then, felt embarrassed for myself because it's the kind of thing that you would see David Brent do in the office, and you think, oh, for God's sake, does that actually really happen? You know, you kind of laugh and then you're horrified and all of those emotions go on at once, and that's kind of quite an odd, you know, you kind of feel that in the text. And
Yeah.
Did I just laugh at that?
But I'm glad. I think it's really good that people are laughing at that, because actually I think that's it's a healthy response, because everybody can see the absurdity of it. I'm good with that. I think it is funny. I think it is funny that people think it's still okay to do that. Yeah. And believe me, I mean, there are, because, I mean, we were having a conversation in here earlier, and we were sort of, you know, exchanging a few stories about the kind of stuff that happens to you, you know, in any given situations. And one day when I was with my friend in the hospital canteen, because that was one of the ways that I used to escape off the ward and away from the Daily Mail ladies, and I just used to kind of go down and just spend hours watching the traffic on the Euston Road and reading the paper and just anything not to be on the ward. Except the trouble was I kept missing the doctor's rounds and all that, but who cares? They weren't any use to me at that point. So it was, you know, I was sitting there, Trish and I were just sitting there chatting and having a cup of tea, and there was a family of 4 people sitting at the table next to us, and they kept glancing over at us, and eventually they got up to leave, and before they left, they came over to the table and completely blanked me, and I was sitting there with my legs sort of up on this, what they used to call a stump board, and, well, still do as far as I know, but anyway, it's yes, this piece of equipment called a stump board, and they came over to Tricia, and they said, "What you're doing is very noble." In other words, visiting a cripple in hospital, you know, you're doing a good thing. And I mean, they said it to her as if I was invisible. And I think she was utterly shocked. I mean, I thought it was quite funny, but she just was astonished that anybody could behave in that manner.
Yeah. Yeah, I think in some ways it's by using humour and making people laugh in those situations that it gets important points across. You know, it's very easy to kind of lecture people and say, you know, this is what you should say and this is what you shouldn't say, and this is offensive and you should feel bad for this and you should watch your language with that. But actually getting it across as a humorous point of view, I think has got lots and lots of merit when it comes to sort of changing attitudes. So it's a worthy mechanism. I mean, in some ways, I guess it's interesting that, you know, reading other people's texts, I wonder how that feels. I mean, these are my texts, these are Barbara's texts, these were intended for me and Barbara, but you're reading texts that at the time we never intended or ever thought anyone else would read. You know, in the same way that if you sneakily read a text on someone else's phone, it just feels a bit wrong. And I was wondering whether or not any of you had that kind of sense, or you kind of felt that you were able to go past that quite easily because it's up here on the gallery, up here on the studio wall, and we're saying, look at it. I guess you're invited in, yeah.
I think it helped after I heard you speak, because I've got your voices in my head now. Whereas before it was like a bit anonymous, you know? And in an art gallery, that's what I would get. So then I'm making up more of the story. Because I'm physically imagining you.
Yeah.
And I've got probably a totally different person.
Yeah, well, that's interesting, particularly if there was an audio layer to it, that you would have our voices already, so you would have probably more of our characters to embellish what's already there, to add to it.
Yeah. So it becomes a bit more multimedia, because you could also kind of have pictures or photos or, you know, whatever. Yeah.
I do hate it in art galleries now, you're talking about the Leonardo exhibition, where you can't go around because people have got those
Headphones.
things on and they're being told what to look at.
Yeah.
So I hope yours doesn't go that way.
Oh, no.
I think sound could be really interesting. I think it could add to it.
Almost even like whispering.
There are so many texts here where there's much more than what's written that I think I would like to at least put them together to see how well they work. I'm just trying to think of a particular